I don't typically review documentaries, but this one's been getting so much buzz recently, I figured I couldn't go without doing so. I'm John Hayeck, and welcome to my movie thoughts. Won't You Be My Neighbor? So this is a new documentary. It centers on Fred Rogers, the guy who did Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Old Friends, New Friends, and several other shows over the course of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, etc. And he really was a cultural influence on people who grew up during that time, and really the entire American pop culture during that time. He's the guy that encouraged children to talk about difficult subjects and encouraged them to embrace who they are and to be themselves and to accept that they are loved for who they are and that they are a special type of person. And this documentary chronicles people from Fred's personal life, from his TV life, talking about who he was, what he stood for, what some of the special episodes of the show were, how the show wound up getting made, why it was so important, and etc. And as I said at the beginning, I don't usually review documentaries because documentaries are kind of a different format from narrative feature storytelling. Narrative features, you understand, here's the plot, here are the characters, this is what you can kind of dissect and analyze. Documentaries, it's all facts. There isn't like too much to review or say what was done well, what was done poorly, or anything like that, or kind of give your thoughts on, why a certain thing worked and why a certain thing didn't. Documentaries, in presenting the facts, there's nothing you can say like, oh yeah, that fact could have been better, like, I don't know. The execution I'll talk about a little bit. I think that this documentary was very effective in presenting the case that it needed to, because I didn't grow up on Mr. Rogers. I didn't really, know tons about him. I didn't see too many of the shows or anything like that. I may have seen a couple clips here and there on a line in the past few years, but even those I'm pretty, barren on remembering. So this documentary succeeded in that it brought Mr. Rogers to this new generation of film goers. I think that if you're around my age, like late teens, early 20s, even up to your mid 20s or something like that, and you didn't see tons of Mr. Rogers, you're now going to think, yeah, I wish the kids had something like this today. I wish they had this positive influence of Mr. Rogers. And I think it's going to succeed in showing older generations who did grow up on Mr. Rogers, or whose kids grew up on Mr. Rogers, exactly what was going on behind the scenes, and kind of a glimpse into what Mr. Rogers really stood for and why he stood for things like that. You don't go too deep into his personal life in this, but I do think you go deep enough into his personal life that people who did grow up on him can really understand a little bit more about him and appreciate a little bit more about who he was and why he stood for some of the things that he stood for, as I previously mentioned. Structurally, I do think that this documentary had a really, really great second half. The second half of this movie, I thought that I was really just emotionally invested in it. There were points where I'm like, man, this is exactly what the first half set up. Whereas I do think the first half was just kind of like, foreground. It was kind of set up to what was going to happen later. It was just kind of establishing, this is who Fred Rogers is, this is how everything came to be and stuff, which again was fascinating for somebody like me who didn't know too much about him, but I do think it was also just a little bit tedious and didn't feel like too engaging if you already knew some of this stuff, and I do feel like in some ways it wasn't super exciting or didn't really grab you and have that emotional hook right off the bat. So I'll tell you guys this, second half of this movie's phenomenal, first half is great and informative, but I do think the first half can be a little bit slow in some points, so if you get through the first half, you'll love the second half. If you grew up on Mr. Rogers, I think you're really going to get something out of this that maybe somebody like me didn't, where I was just kind of learning about it this time around. So those are my thoughts on it. If you've really enjoyed Mr. Rogers from generations past, go ahead and check out Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, or no, the movie's called Won't You Be My Neighbor, so go ahead and check out Won't You Be My Neighbor, and let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section down below. You guys can go over to mymoviethoughts.com, follow me on Twitter at John Hayeck, and subscribe to this YouTube channel for tons more posts from me. Links to all three of those in the description down below. You guys can also like this video, comment on it, share it with some friends. I am John Hayeck, so thank you guys so much for watching.